As little as long ago, or as far away as forever, this is where we meet to celebrate what never was as it comes to pass. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is FallenAngels.tv. I thank you for joining me for this Sabbath broadcast. And for Lawrence, you had asked me about honoring the commandments, and specifically the one about honoring the Sabbath, especially because so many mainstream churches and brick and mortars churches, as my friend Nancy would say, they don't meet on the Sabbath, and so it's hard to find a congregation of people to worship and to praise and to give honor to the Most High and the Son in that fashion. And I was talking to Nancy earlier today about how even when you gathered, with a friend in speaking on the phone and talking with another about the gospel and about the secrets contained therein, and in sharing information and having dialogue, that is fellowship. Because Christ said that where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am also. And so that is church. It doesn't have to be a building or something along that kind of a line. It could even be a Bible study in your own home, in the comfort of your living room, sharing scripture and hors d'oeuvres, and so church, especially if you think about going back to the early days of the apostles, many of their meetings, in which of course that was church as well, even though there was no such organized way, but that they were gathering together over meals, and after work, during times of whenever they could, they were just meeting together to share the stories that they had of their experience in being in the presence of Christ, and of learning from His example, and of the many stories and the parables that He had referenced to them. They were sharing and trying to come to revelation on all of the different things that He was telling them in story form. And so that is church, and it's similar. So even today, with us gathering together in the way that we are and sharing fellowship over the airwaves, no matter where each of you may be, and even though we are not in the physical presence of one another, this most certainly is church as well. And that this is fellowship in that way. And I know for a lot of you that have awoken to a lot of the strange and esoteric aspects of what we are dealing with as an ecclesia in this last days, that it is often difficult, very difficult even, to find others in which to be able to converse on the higher aspects of what is the profound, deeper revelations of the gospel. And so, we must gather together in ways that we can. My friend Dolores, she started a Sons of God study group on Facebook, and that is also ecclesia. That is also a gathering of seekers of truth. The motto for our website, and I do encourage and ask those of you that can to join us at FallenAngels.tv, www.FallenAngels.tv. The motto for the website: a seeker of lost paradise may seem a fool to those whom have never sought the other worlds. And this is so very true, that there are, the elect and the righteous and those that even consider the kingdom relevant and important for their life, that make it a priority, are but a very few, and that most are not even seeking out and trying to rediscover or connect to lost paradise. And so most are caught up in the carnal aspects of world and are certainly okay with the things that have been taught to us by the Matrix, and that the American dream of materialism and the gathering of wealth and getting a good education and a good job so that we can be good tax-paying citizens and reap the benefits of being such, that is the focus of life. And for much of the world, that is the direction, and that is the goals and the dreams that have consumed their life. And for many, that's all they will ever seek. That's all they will ever want to succeed at. And they put their entire self, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, into trying to achieve such goal. And most of them will never even hear about nor actually endeavor to seek out anything other. And so the kingdom is something that not a lot of people in the world have any concern for. And this goes along with even a lot of those that are churchgoers, that are part of mainstream churchianity. They will go to church the one day a week, but really their lives are committed more to their jobs and their families, and to succeeding in their jobs, making a lot of money and accumulating a lot of things, and that their spirituality and relationship with God, those things are put on the back burner. They are secondary in priority. And so a lot of people live that way, and even though they try to front and put the mask forward that they are concerned with their eternal salvation, the truth, the real truth of what's in their heart, is that they are more apt to be seeking out and involved in sin or entertainment or those delusions which most of the world is enveloped and comfortable with. And so, the church and fellowship is a difficult thing for real truth seekers. And I do consider many of you, a lot of you, and I know that we have a lot of new listeners, and that there are a lot of people just now really being introduced to my work that have discovered us in the way that they have, that are being led to fellowship with us, and I welcome all of you. But that so much of the world is caught up in the matrix and not really committed to bearing the cross and to living and adhering to the commandments in the way that Christ exampled to all of us. A lot of people are still trying to succeed in whatever the matrix would, as far as their job and title and power and prestige and position, and to be placed into things of authority, and those are the kind of things which drive and propel the New World Order. And we were talking about this on the last show that I did this past Wednesday with Professor Truth, and talking about the two different ways of being: the service to self and to service to others, and how Lucifer and the fallen angels and those that he led astray in promising them godhood and kingdoms to own and to rule and own of the for themselves, that they were absolutely not wanting to be servants and not wanting to be under the dominion of the Son, that they wanted to be as God themselves, that they were aspiring to have the praise and the worship and to be honored themselves, much rather than honoring the Son and serving in the Morning Star administration. And so that's why they rebelled. In Ezekiel chapter 28, Isaiah chapter 14, it talks about the aspects of Lucifer prior to his fall, and while he was still in his first estate, and how beautiful and how the Father had blessed him in all aspects, and yet he wanted more and more, and he wanted and then had aspirations to be as the Most High. He wanted to place his throne in the sides of the north, and he wanted all the angels to worship him. And so he promised them godhood and promised them authority and power and prestige, just as he promises those of the line of Cain, the synagogue of Satan, those that serve him and that follow his directive, that are propagating and pushing forth the agenda for the New World Order. It's the same kind of thing. And look, they have been excluded from salvation, and they have condemnation and judgment awaiting them. And though this world is temporary under their reign, and that they can, they have deceived and led astray most of the masses. In Revelation 12, it speaks about the serpent, the wise old dragon, which deceiveth the entirety of the whole world. Look at what the Father and the Son have established through the line of the patriarchs, that are his people and his sheep and his lambs and those that follow him. He, when the apostles asked him who amongst them was the greatest, he went to wash their feet and to show through example that service to others and service to your brothers, that this is the way of being, the way of the priest and not the way of the king. Because the seed of the serpent, the line of Cain, they are aspiring to kingship, and they are wanting to be as tyrants, oppressors, and to be ruling with impunity. And yet Christ's example to those of the seed of the woman, to be the priest, to feed the flock, to feed the sheep, to be the good shepherd, to be the good father to the prodigal son. And so those are the two different ways. And those are the things we are still learning about. So I hope that answers your question, Lordens, I believe is your name. But anyways, I want to answer one other thing that Nancy had brought forth earlier today when I was talking to her on the phone. And she had asked me about what I thought about, those that speak in tongues, and what I thought about speaking in tongues. And so the answer that I gave, I want to touch upon a couple passages real quick, and then we'll get into one news item I want to share, and then we're going to go into the context of the show that I have lined up for you evening, which is focused on the Apocryphon of John, which is the secret revelation of John, part of the Hammadi codices, and we'll talk about that as well. But as far as speaking in tongues, you can reference Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2 to get an idea for what the Holy Spirit, when it came over the apostles, what speaking in tongues is about. And in chapter 1 of Acts it says this, verse 7, "And he said unto them, It is not for you to know the times of the seasons, which the Father hath put in his own power. But ye shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and in all Judea, and in Samaria, and unto the uttermost parts of the earth. And when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud receiveth him out of their sight." Now, in Acts 2, the actual Holy Spirit coming upon what Christ was referencing, that the Holy Ghost would come upon them, and that they should be witnesses and testify to all the peoples in all these different parts of the country, that on the day of Pentecost this actually happened. And this is the reference. In Acts chapter 2 it says this, "And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven, as of rushing mighty wind. And it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men, out of every nation under heaven. And now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in our own tongue, wherein we were born? Parthians and Medes and Elamites, and the dwellers in Mesopotamia, in Judea and Cappadocia, in Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, in Egypt, and in parts of Libya, about Cyrene, and strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians, we do hear them speak in our own tongues the wonderful works of God. And they were all amazed and were in doubt, saying one to another, What meaneth this? So, in my opinion, the answer that I gave to Nancy when she asked me about this is that speaking in tongues, when the Holy Spirit came upon the apostles, so that all those that were around them could understand them in their own language, and that the power of the Spirit made it so that each one of these various individuals from various different nations and different parts of the world, that in their own language they could understand what the apostles were saying when they were given testimony in testament of Christ, and the relationships that they had with him, the stories that they experienced with him, the parables that he had told unto them. And so in my mind, this is what speaking in tongues is about. Now, I don't understand, what people are doing in various churches when, they just are speaking in in a way that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that, and I'm not saying that, that they are not being touched in some way. It could also be, and this is something that Nancy had brought up, is that, because the mainstream churches, and so many of them are involved in idolatry without necessarily understanding that they are involved in idolatry and that they are serving in certain aspect pagan rituals, that this certainly could be demonic. And so I don't know. I don't understand with what's going on in the mainstream churches. I do believe that we have been called out. That it also says within the word that come out of her, my people. And that in my mind, it would be better to seek out fellowship in the way that we are doing here today, and to find others that are seekers of truth, and to share fellowship in this way, and dialogue and conversation over truth and the secret aspects of the gospel, than in going to churches that, because not even, Sunday's not even the Sabbath. And we have most of the mainstream churches, they do worship on Sunday, and that there's a lot of, with the Easter and with the Christmas, which are celebrations of the winter solstice and the fertility rites and festivals, which are linked to and connected to a start day, that most churches are involved in those as well. And that, even Christmas trees are put up, and that this is also a form of idol worship. And so there's a lot of paganism that has seeped into many of the mainstream churches. And so and then another thing is that how much truth is being taught when most of the pastors, most of the ministers, preachers, they have no idea as to what they are reading within the gospel, and that so many are looking to them for answers, and they don't know anything about the line of Cain. They don't know about the giants or the fallen angels, the wars between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, the enmity between the bloodlines, the connections with the wheat and the tares, the goats and the sheep. I mean, so much of that is veiled to them, and so much of what is contained within the gospel is dependent on even that one aspect of discernment alone. And then the other, the things connected with predestination and election and pre-existence, even with Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5, where it says, I knew you before you ever entered into the womb of your mother. I foreordained you to be a prophet unto the nations. I mean, they can't connect the dots. And so what are they teaching? I mean, they can't even answer Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. And those are very relevant and very profound questions. And so when you go up to it and you ask them, try asking your if you are still going to the mainstream churches, ask them about Cain being a child of the devil. Ask them as to why Cain is excluded from the lineage of Christ in Luke chapter 3. And there's no answer. Oh, that's blasphemous. That's heretical. You can't even ask them about these things. And then if you mention pre-existence or predestination, even though it's right there in Ephesians chapter 1, and other aspects of the word. Oh, that's Mormon, or that's cultish, or and so how much truth is really being taught within the churches? And so, okay. Now, I wanted to share one other thing. With you, and this has something to do with the flight, the Malaysian flight that recently disappeared. Because, and this is something that you should know about anyways, because this happens quite a lot, and you're going to see these kind of things occurring more and more when people disappear, or flights completely disappear. And so the story that I'm going to share with you first has to do with, many of you will remember the miracle in Hudson Bay. Captain, I believe his name was Hoyer, and when he was able to land a plane that supposedly had sucked some birds into its engines, and that it lost power, and then it landed. He was able to safely land it in the Hudson Bay in the water, and then all the people were able to get out and to climb out on the wings, and their lives were saved, and he was hailed as a hero. Well, what most people don't know about that particular flight is that there were 23 Bank of America executives on board on that flight. And this has to do with something that I'm going to mention when we talk about, and I'm going to post a link to the story for those that have access to the chat room if you want to check it out for yourself, just to verify what I'm talking about. But I'm going to read just a little bit from this story just to give you an idea as to why it was that this plane went down and that they were not supposed to survive. And the reason being is that these Bank of America executives were targeted. And there were also other banking executives targeted because there were certain others from Wells Fargo, and they were being targeted as well. Just as much as we are seeing, all these bank executives and high-level Wall Street people being killed off even right now, that this kind of thing has been ongoing for a very long time. And so I'm going to read a little bit about this, and then we'll bring out the information about the Malaysian flight, because it's my opinion that this absolutely has something to do with the disappearance of that flight. And so I'm not going to read the whole article on this, but just certain aspects of it. And the other article, I'll link that also to the chat room once I get to it. But it says this: it seems like bad luck to fly on the same plane as bank executives, especially when a major deal is in the works. In this case, 15% of the 155 passengers happened to be Bank of America executives. The flight, which left LaGuardia Airport late after a gate change, was packed with a diverse cross-section, 23 frequent flying Bank of America executives returning home after meetings in New York, a band of buddies on a golf trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, 74-year-old man who had just attended his brother's funeral, a family trying to visit a grandmother before her surgery, and in seat 13F, Emma Sofina, a 26-year-old pop star from Australia. At the same time Flight 1549 came crashing down, other Bank of America news was breaking. Bank of America Corp. may receive a $15 billion government infusion to help absorb Merrill Lynch, but shares of the bank and Citigroup Incorporated tumbled on Thursday on worries over their ability to handle soaring credit losses. Remember, right after 2008, after the financial debacle, the crash of 2008, when, I forget who the guy was, but he was the Treasury Secretary under George Bush, and he went to Congress and basically told them, you got to give us $750 billion for a TARP fund or the whole economy, and the banking system's going to collapse. And that they gave all the large banks of the, all the large banks during that time, they infused them with all this cash to make them stable, and then they said to get lending going again, but instead all of these banks used that free money in order to purchase a lot of these smaller regional banks, and that they also bought up a number of different companies and investment companies, different companies tied to and connected to money and to the investment side of it, mortgage side of it, that these banks, even though that they said the money was to make lending happen again, and that it was to cause the banks to start lending money to small businesses and things of that nature, the banks actually used this money to buy up a lot of assets, and to also to write off a bunch of bad loans on their books. But this was during that time when the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and certain companies were allowed to go down in order to bring pressure upon Congress, and that a lot of the larger banking institutions, they were infused with money from this TARP system, and that they utilized this money to make more investments and also to buy up, these different companies. So I'm just going to read a little bit more, and then we're going to go into the other aspect of the story. Okay. So both lenders face mounting pressure from investors that they can manage a surge in bad loans caused by the deep economic recession. The two companies will offer more details on Friday. Citigroup is reporting fourth quarter results at 6 a.m. Eastern, and Bank of America an hour later. Late Thursday, Bank of America said it was moving up its release from January 20. Citigroup was originally set for January 22nd. Funds for Bank of America would come from the Treasury Department's Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, and supplement a prior $25 billion infusion of financial policy source familiar with the talk said. Basically, these were big payoffs to big banking institutions, and the money, was given to them so that they could make even larger investments and also write off all their bad debt. All right. Just a couple more paragraphs about this. U.S. President George W. Bush and President-elect Barack Obama have signed off on the aid for the largest U.S. bank, which expected to include government guarantees, the source said. Bank of America sought the aid to absorb growing credit losses at Merrill Lynch. And here, Bank of America was actually trying to buy Merrill Lynch, and that they were going to have to, take on all of Merrill's debt and bad loans as well. And so this is one way of them absorbing that company basically for free and at taxpayer expense. All right. couple other things. This is another story linked in this article that's talking about another crash which happened earlier, which is similar to this particular story. The executives have spent the day secretly negotiating to sell their company, one of the nation's largest credit card issuers, to Wachovia, the big bank. Both sides had agreed to the outlines of the deal, and the only thing left to settle was the final price. But then the unthinkable happened. The helicopter carrying the MBNA executives back to Delaware headquarters plunged into the East River less than a minute after takeoff. And despite several harrowing moments trapped underwater in the copter, the executives managed to escape largely unscathed. Their deal with Wachovia was not so lucky. 4 days later, Wachovia's board voted against pursuing a purchase, deciding that the asking price was too high. All right, I'm going to skip to one last thing. There couldn't be a worse time than this for such a strange plane crash to occur, one in which 15% of the passengers happened to be Bank of America executives, because now the Bank of America CEO is being threatened with forced retirement. All right, all that being said, you can see how the New World Order uses plane crashes in order to sway deals or to stop deals or to cause what they were hoping, in my opinion, was to be a further crash in the stock price of Bank of America, because they were trying to purchase this bank. Other large banks and institutions, they were swallowing up. They were using the fusion of cash from the TARP program to swallow up and to buy other large banking assets. And that a lot of consolidation occurred during what was the market crash of 2008. And so you have to understand that the New World Order uses these kind of crashes in order to consolidate and to buy at fire sale prices large companies and large institutions that they have had their eyes on for a very long time. And so if you know, that particular captain that landed that plane safely in the Hudson Bay, if all of those people would have died and 23 executives from Bank of America would have died on that plane, the price, the stock of Bank of America would have plunged, and they would have actually been able to acquire it for the prices and the, you know, the and to consolidate as they had wished. All right. That being said, I'm going to quickly cover the Malaysian plane and the flight that, you know, they are still looking for. And let me go ahead and post a link of this article into the chat room so that you can follow along with and read, you know, completely what I'm going to be talking about. All right. This will cover the reality of why it was that particular plane disappeared. Okay? So you have to always know that what is being portrayed in the mainstream news is not the truth that is not any way connected to the truth that, you know, for those that don't do a little research and do a little homework can understand, because there's always an ulterior motive. There's always an agenda, and that the modus operandi of the New World Order is problem, reaction, solution. So often they will present some kind of a false flag event or some kind of problem in order to bring forth, you know, the protocol for them to get to a certain agenda, to force a certain outcome. and this goes to with like even the Oklahoma City bombings, and even what happened on 9/11, that the security budgets and that even the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the funding of FEMA, these kind of things, that these false flag events are initiated in order to create large pools of money for security increases, for the funding of, even with like Blackwater and private contractors, these kind of things. And so that's the way the New World Order works. All right, that being said, we're going to go into this story on the disappearance of the Malaysian plane. First, the title of the article that I'm going to be reading from says, Rothschild inherits a semiconductor patent for free-scale semiconductors now that Malaysian plane has vanished. And this was published on March 27th, 2014. So just a couple weeks ago. All right. The disappearance of 4 members of a patent semiconductor traveling on Malaysian Airlines MH370 makes the famous billionaire Jacob Rothschild the sole owner of the important patent. Now that headline right there should let you know that New World Order is connected to, and that this important patent, that all other 4 owners of the patent just suddenly disappeared with that flight. And now Jacob Rothschild is the sole owner of this very important patent. And the timing of the patent and the disappearance of this flight is very critical as well. And so we're going to get into that. And I know I'm running out of time, but if I need to do another show on what we'll be covering with the secret revelation of John, I can certainly do so. But I think this is important enough for you, and especially for those of you that are new to government-sponsored terror and to the fact that, our governments, especially America, the CIA, that they've been funding terrorism for a very long time, that we created the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, that the CIA funded them a long time ago during the early 80s and the mid-80s to fight against the Russians that were then invading Afghanistan, that we are also currently funding the Muslim Brotherhood and those separatist organizations, these rebel groups in these various Middle Eastern countries that are in the process of killing Christians on a mass scale, and that there's such abomination going on in the Middle East that they are even cannibalizing Christians and drinking the blood of these individuals that are being slaughtered, and that these rebel groups are the ones that were using these chemical weapons and that are being set up and funded to be the Al-Qaeda arm in these various Middle Eastern countries, and that they are being used by our government to go after the puppet dictators that were installed a long time ago, that this is always the MO, the modus operandi, the controlled opposition. Even with what happened in Iraq, with Saddam Hussein being put into power, and then his tyrannizing over his people, his torturing of all of his, his citizens, that was the reason for us to go in and invade the country. First we tried to blame 9/11 on Iraq, but when that failed, we had to go in and oust Saddam Hussein, who's a terrorist and a tyrant, and then our government tortures and brutalizes people even more than what he did. I mean, It's insane. It is complete insanity, and yet that is the reality of what we are dealing with as well. All right, so we're going to read just a little bit of this article. The mystery surrounding the Malaysian Airlines MH370 is growing as each day passes, with more mysterious silence shadowing the disappearance of the airline. More and more conspiracy theories are beginning to boom on the internet. One of the conspiracies, one is the Freescale Semiconductors ARM microcontroller, KL03, which is a new improvised version of an older microcontroller, KL02. This crazy story about how Illuminati Rothschild exploited the airlines to gain full patent rights of an incredible KL03 microchip is going haywire across the internet, especially when it's involving Jacob Rothschild as the evil master plotter. A U.S. technology company which had 20 senior staff on board Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 had just launched a new electronic warfare gadget for military radar systems in the days before the Boeing 777 went missing. Freescale Semiconductor has been developing microchip processors, sensors, and other technology for the past 50 years. The technology it creates is commonly referred to as embedded processors, which, according to the firm, are standalone semiconductors that perform dedicated computing functions in electronic systems. Why were so many Freescale employees traveling together? What were their jobs? Were they on a mission? And if so, what was this mission? Can these employees be the cause of the disappearance of this plane? Could the plane have been then hijacked and these people kidnapped? Did these employees hold valuable information? Did they have any valuable cargo with them? Did they know company and technological secrets? With all the might of the technology, why can't this plane be located? Where is this plane and where are these people? Just a little bit more. The 20 Freescale employees among 239 people on flight MH370 were mostly engineers and other experts working to make the company's chip facilities in Tianjin, China, and Kuala Lumpur more efficient, said Mitch Hawes, Vice President of Global Communications and Investor Relations. These were people with a lot of experience and technical background, and they were very important people. It's definitely a loss for the company. All right. Freescale RF is involved in creating solutions for aerospace and defense in battlefield communications, avionics, HF radar, missile guidance, electronic warfare, identification, friend or foe. All right, just a couple more quick paragraphs. Freescale shareholders include the Carlyle Group, which we know that's a group of investors, high individual, George Bush Sr., former British Prime Minister John Major, all these heavyweight clients. And this company also has connections to Saudi bin Laden Group, the construction firm owned by the family of Osama bin Laden. Imagine that. All right. The company says they were flying to China to improve its consumer products operations, but Freescale's fresh link to electronic warfare technology is likely to trigger more speculation and deepen the mystery. Experts have been baffled how a large passenger jet seems to have flown undetected and possibly beaten military radar systems for up to 6 hours. Avoiding radar via cloaking technology has long been one of the objectives of the defense industry, and Freescale has been active developing chips for military radar. The comment reads, Have you pieced together the puzzle of missing Flight 370 to Beijing, China? If not, here are your missing pieces. 4 days after the flight MH370 disappeared, semiconductor patent was approved by the U.S. Patent Office. The patent is divided in parts of 20% between 5 starters. One of the owners is the company itself, Freescale Semiconductor, Austin, Texas, USA, and the other 4 Chinese employees of the company, Paidong Wang, Xinjiang Chang, and Li Yin Zhejiang, all the Suzhou City, and they all were passengers on the Malaysia Airlines plane that disappeared on March 8th, according to eternity. Last 2 paragraphs. It adds, here is your motive for the missing Beijing plane, as all 4 Chinese members of the patent were passengers on the missing plane. Patent holders can alter the proceeds legally by passing wealth to their heirs. However, they cannot do so until the patent is approved, and so when the plane went missing, the patent had not yet been approved, meaning that Jacob Rothschild is now the sole owner of that patent. Interesting, huh? All right. I know we're running out of time, so let me just cover just a little bit about the Nag Hammadi codices, and then we'll get into this story on the Apocryphon of John. All right. If I missed any questions, please paste them in the chat room, and I will try to read them, because there's a lot of dialogue going on in the chat room, and it moves up very fast, and sometimes I will miss your questions, and for that I apologize, but I thought that the story was relevant enough that I should spend a little bit of time on it. And as I said, as far as the Apocryphon John and the other things that I'm going to be getting into, I can always reschedule another show. Also, I've had a lot of you comment to me as to how you enjoy when I do cover some of these news stories, and that I present to you discernment in the way that I do, and try to help you to get a grasp on what's going on, as far as the world, and how the mainstream news and the stories that we hear from the mainstream news, how they are really propaganda, and that we are trying to be swayed one way or the other to believe certain things, and that really we can't believe anything that is being told to us, not only because the government is in fact financing and funding the creation of news stories that is being shared with the many branches of the mainstream presses, and that these stories are not even based on any kind of truth, but they are fully fabricated in order to sway public opinion one way or the other. And so for those of you that are new to the conspiratorial side of what we are dealing with as a world, and that have approached this show and others, that are also covering both the conspiratorial side as well as the biblical and the prophetic side, the gospel and the secrets that are contained within them. Reality, is truth is stranger than fiction. And the reality of what we're dealing with as a world is completely mind-blowing, to say the least. And so, those of you that are new to this aspect and the New World Order side of what's going on with the world, it can be a lot to try to wrap your mind around. And it is certainly a lot to contend with, especially if you were a patriot and a constitutionalist and believed in government and believe your doctors and believe the news media and so when you take the red pill and you have to deal with the fact that everything is turned upside down, as Jonathan says, my friend Jonathan Kleck, and that everything we thought we knew, that most of that is based on an illusion and based on fabrication and propaganda, that it can be too much for people, and that a lot of people will not want to go any further down the rabbit hole. And so, all right, what we're going to be covering today is the Apocryphon of John, and it's part of the Nag Hammadi library, the Nag Hammadi codices, which, for those that don't know, it's a collection of so-called quote-unquote Gnostic texts, and that many of the mainstream churches that they have labeled Gnostic texts as, that Gnostic word is almost a dirty word, even though most people have never even read these texts and never even studied them. But, there are certain aspects that contradict, and there are certain aspects that give greater detail too. But in the entirety, as a whole, it's my opinion that there are secrets contained within them that are very relevant and that provide extra detail on what is being shared within the Old and the New Testament. But of course, anytime you have something that contradicts, that you should most certainly stay with the foundation of the canon, and with even the canon with the Apocryphal and the pseudepigraphal text, because those are the mainstay of the scriptures that were available to the apostles even during the time of their lives, and that was the foundation for their belief systems, and that many of them were written by them so that they could relate to the masses their own experience and their relationship with Christ in what became the early formation of the early church. And again, these Gnostic, these codices, they date back to, like 100 AD, and some of them as early as 70 AD. So right after and what was the early formation of the early church. And so it's interesting at least to read them and to study them and to gain insight from them. And, like I said, there's a lot where they will confirm and add greater detail to what is being spoken of within the Word. A collection of Gnostic texts discovered near the Upper Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi in 1945. 12 leather-bound papyrus codices buried in a sealed jar were found by a local farmer named Muhammad al-Saman. The writings in these codices comprise 52 mostly Gnostic treatises, but that they also include 3 works belonging to the Corpus Hermeticum and a partial translation, alteration of Plato's Republic. In his introduction to the Nag Hammadi Library in English, James Robinson suggested that these codices may have belonged to a nearby Pachamonian monastery and were buried after Bishop Athanasius condemned the use of non-canonical books in his festal letter of 367 AD. All right, they're written in the Coptic language, and it says that some of them were probably translations from the Greek. All right, I'm not going to read any further as to them, but it's interesting to me that they were found in 1945, right before Israel came to be a nation. Because it's my opinion that when that occurred, when Israel came to be gathered again as a nation, that was the blooming of the fig tree that was cited in reference by Christ in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, where he says, "Know ye the parable of the fig tree." And he said, when you see the branches give bloom, and basically he's, in my opinion, and the Apocalypse of Peter confirms this, because Peter asked Christ in that particular text what the blooming of the parable the parable of the fig tree meant, and he told them that it was the regathering of the nation of Israel, and that when we saw the nation of Israel come together again, that we would be the generation that would see the fulfillment of all these things. And so it's also my opinion that when this occurred, that Lucifer and the fallen angels, that they knew very well that they had one generation left, and that they were quickly running out of time, and that their time was almost up. And that, even with because isn't it also fascinating that right after this happened, that the agenda for the New World Order was accelerated, with the United Nations and all of that. And then also that we had the incidents with Roswell, and I don't know if you know, but a lot of the technology that was back engineered from the craft that was discovered from that particular incident, that even the internet and computers and different technologies, that they were all back engineered from that particular that incident and those particular things, and that a lot of technology have their basis from some of the things that occurred during that time. And so the fallen angels, they knew that their time was short, and that they have accelerated their agenda for the strong delusion, which would be that the ancient aliens would be our creators, and that and that also that they would be our saviors, and that they are coming again to resolve the problems of the world. The Antichrist, in my opinion, will also be connected to this agenda. But one of the interesting aspects of the Nag Hammadi codices, which I will go into very soon, is that it mentions the archons, and that the archons are the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness, the Nephilim, as cited with Genesis chapter 6, and that they are also referencing the rebel angels, which were cast out of the heavens on the second day, and that were here upon the planet prior to our coming in the modern creation of humanity. All right. Now, I'm going to read from the Apocryphon of John. Going to establish the premise for this text. And then next week, just so you know, I'm going to be doing a show on the offering of Isaac, because a lot of people ask me about that too, why it was that God would ask Abraham to sacrifice his only child. And so I'm going to cover that story in full, and I'm going to cite Jasher, because most people don't know as to that Isaac had challenged his brother Ishmael. That Ishmael was bragging about how that he had offered his foreskin in circumcision to the Most High God, but that Isaac was boasting then that even if the Most High asked him to be a sacrifice and to give his whole life, that he would gladly do it. And so that set the premise for what would be the temptation of Abraham and Isaac with something that Isaac had said. And so anyways, I'm going to cover that story in full to help you understand better that particular story, because it's not as is related in short duration within the Old Testament, because for those that hear about that story that don't understand the context of it, people would assume that the Most High God is genocidal, homicidal, just as they think when they refer to the story of Joshua and his being led into the land of Canaan, and how they were going against the sons of Anak, the giants, that that these people were cannibals, and also that they offered their children in sacrifice to idols. And that's why it was that he told them to slaughter and to spare no man, woman, or child. But anyways, I'll cover that next week. And then if I need to, I'll set up a second, which I know I will have to, show on these particular teachings. The teaching of the Savior and the revelation of the mysteries and the things hidden in silence, even these things which he taught John his disciple. And it happened one day when John, the brother of James, who are the sons of Zebedee, had come up to the temple, that a Pharisee named Aramanius approached him and said to him, "Where is your master whom you followed?" And he said to him, "He has gone to the place from which he came." The Pharisee said to him, "With deception did this Nazarene deceive you, and he filled your ears with lies and closed your hearts, and turned you from the traditions of your fathers." And when I, John, heard these things, I turned away from the temple to a desert place, and I grieved greatly in my heart, saying, "How then was the Savior appointed, and why was he sent into the world by his Father? And who is his Father who sent him? And of what sort is that eon to which we shall go? For what did he mean when he said to us, 'This aeon to which you will go is of the type of the imperishable aeon'? But he did not teach us concerning the latter of what sort it is." And so the rest of the text will actually answer a lot of these questions, which are questions that all of us have had, and wanted to know about. And so we'll continue. "Straightway, while I was contemplating these things, behold, the heavens opened, and the whole creation which is below heaven shone. And the world was shaken. I was afraid, and behold, I saw in the light a youth who stood by me. And while I looked at him, he became like an old man, and he changed his likeness again, becoming like a servant. There was not a plurality before me, but there was a likeness with multiple forms in the light, and the likeness appeared through each other, and the likeness had three forms. And he said to me, 'John, John, why do you doubt, or why are you afraid? You are not unfamiliar with this image, are you? That is, do not be timid. I am the one who is with you always. I am the Father. I am the Mother. I am the Son. I am the undefiled and incorruptible one. Now I have come to teach you what it is, and was, and what will come to pass, that you may know the things which are not revealed, and those which are revealed. and to teach you concerning the unwavering race of the perfect man. Now, therefore, lift up your face, that you may receive the things that I shall teach you today, and may tell them to you, your fellow spirits who are from the unwavering race of the perfect man. I need to make a comment here real quick. A lot of the Nag Hammadi codices and the stories that you'll find, secret books of James, the secret book of John, a lot of these hidden books and hidden stories, these texts come from what was we hear in the gospel about when Christ died on the cross, and then the 3 days after he was resurrected, and that when he was resurrected, that he also brought with him others, and that he resurrected others from hell or Sheol, and that many of these individuals were seen in the streets of Jerusalem, and that they also gave a testimony as to Christ coming down into Sheol, breaking open the doors of iron and brass, and freeing the patriarchs from Adam to the thief that died on the cross, and that he took many of them up into paradise, and that they were dwelling in the city of God, but that many of them were resurrected and were in the streets of Jerusalem as a testimony to what Christ had done, and how he was the arbiter of life and death, and that even the Gospel of Nicodemus, which gives a detailed accounting as to the 3 days when Christ was, in the grave, or supposedly in the grave, which he was in Sheol and freeing the patriarchs, and then took them up into paradise and was with them in the city of God in New Jerusalem before he came back to Jerusalem with several other witnesses, and that he was seen. He was seen by his apostles. He was seen by the two that were walking in the street, and that he appeared even to his apostles again with Thomas, and Thomas, looked at his hands and placed his finger into his side. That all those stories occurred afterward. But anyways, many of these stories are after his resurrection, when he comes to the apostles, and he tells them that I'm not going to speak to you in parable form, but I'm going to tell you about the secrets and to help you understand them in a way that I haven't spoken prior. That these teachings will not be in parable form, but they will be plainly spoken, and he allows them to ask questions, and he elaborates and gives them a detailed accounting as to the secrets and to the mysteries of this world. And that's why he also talks about the archons, the fallen angels, and how they came to be under in authority here in this world. But anyways, I'm just going to cover a little bit more because I know we have already run out of time. But here Christ is going to talk about the Godhood, the Trinity, and he's going to next give explanation as to the Father. And it's very profound the way that he explains this, which in my mind is a test to the fact that they are inspired. And I asked to know it, and he said to me, the monad is a monarchy with nothing above it. It is he who exists as God and Father of everything, the invisible one who is above everything, who exists as incorruption, which is in the pure light into which no eye can look. He is the invisible spirit of whom it is not right to think of him as a God or something similar, for he is more than a God, since there is nothing above him, for no one lords it over him. For he does not exist in something inferior to him, since everything exists in him. For it is he who establishes himself. He is eternal, since he does not need anything, for he is total perfection. He did not lack anything that he might be completed by it. Rather, he is always completely perfect in light. He is illimitable, since there is no one prior to him to set limits to him. He is unsearchable, since there exists no one prior to him to examine him. He is immeasurable, since there was no one prior to him to measure him. He is invisible, since no one saw him. He is eternal, since he exists eternally. He is ineffable, since no one was able to comprehend him, to speak about him. He is unnameable, since there is no one prior to him to give him a name. He is immeasurable light, which is pure, holy, and immaculate. He is ineffable, being perfect in incorruptibility. He is not in perfection, nor in blessedness, nor in divinity, but he is far superior. He is not corporeal, nor is he incorporeal. He is neither large, nor is he small. There is no way to say what is his quantity, or what is his quality, for no one can know him. He is not someone among other beings. Rather, he is far superior. Not that he is simply superior, but his essence does not partake in the eons, nor in time. For he who partakes in an eon was prepared beforehand. Time was not apportioned to him, since he does not receive anything from another, for it would be received on loan. For he who precedes someone does not lack, that he may receive from him. For rather, it is the latter that looks expectantly at him in his light. Couple paragraphs. I'll stop after I speak about the nature of the Father before going into Barbello, which is the Holy Spirit. And then it speaks about the Son. For the perfection is majestic. He is pure, immeasurable mind. He is an eon-giving eon. He is life-giving life. He is blessedness-giving blessed one. He is knowledge-giving knowledge. He is goodness-giving goodness. He is mercy and redemption-giving mercy. He is grace-giving grace, not because he possesses it, but because he gives the immeasurable, incomprehensible light. How am I to speak with you about him? His eon is indestructible, at rest and existing in silence, reposing and being prior to everything. For he is the head of all the eons, and it is he who gives them strength in his goodness. For we know not the ineffable things, and we do not understand what is immeasurable, except for him who came forth from him, namely, from the Father. For it is he who told it to us alone. For it is he who looks at himself in his light which surrounds him, namely, the spring of the water of life. And it is he who gives to all, the eons, and in every way, and who gazes upon his image, which he sees in the spring of the Spirit. It is his desire in his water light, which is in the spring of the pure light water which surrounds him. All right, I'm going to just make a quick explanation of this, and then we'll pick it up on the next one. Basically, the Gnostic text, and in this very esoteric passage, it tells you that the Father is he that preceded everything, and that all things are of him, and that everything came of him. in the Son, we know that the Son pre-existed with the Father and the Son, and also the Holy Spirit, and it speaks about this. And it will continue this in the next few paragraphs when explaining that. But basically, even science speaks about how everything came from one source, that all things within the universe sprang from one tiny point of being. And that source, that force, is spirit, is God. And even though science tries to separate out the mystery, separate the great spirit and the great mystery from what is the creation and the universe, those of you that understand God essence, we understand that all things are a reflection of Him, and that all light, all atoms, electrons, protons, neutrons, all of them have as their source God, and that pure light is the source, is the essence of the Most High, and that the light stepped down in vibration and slowed in energy and evolving outward and expanding outward, that the light slowed down in density and frequency and became all other aspects of what is the atomic, the charts of the elements, that even in this third dimensional reality where we knock on a piece of wood or we tap on a piece of metal, that even though it seems completely dense and that these forms seem to be completely of some hardened substance, that really they have their source as light, and the light has stepped down to such a degree in frequency and vibration that it has taken on in dimension and form the physical attributes and the physical aspects of what we see as our third dimensional reality and world. But that in truth, everything is energy, everything is atoms, protons, and neutrons. Everything is light, and that the spectrum of light, compiles and creates all things, but that really all things are of and from God. And so I cover these things also in my book when I talk about the nature of the Most High, the nature of God, and trying to help people to understand, the what seems to be trying to explain in a way the unknowable, and trying to make it reachable, make these kind of things understandable to in layman's terms about the Most High God. But it's difficult because words have limits, and we're at the show, people. I want to thank all of you for joining me, and please do join me this Wednesday on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll cover more and deeper aspects of what is the strange nature of reality. God bless all. I pray for your discernment and your protection and your grace. In Yahushua, Yahuwah's name. As little as long ago, or as far away as forever, this is where we meet to celebrate what never was as it comes to pass. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is FallenAngels.tv. I thank you for joining me for this Sabbath broadcast. Um, and for Lawrence, you had asked me about honoring the commandments, and specifically the one about um, honoring the Sabbath, especially because so many mainstream churches and brick and mortars churches, as my friend Nancy would say, they don't meet on the Sabbath, and so it's hard to find a congregation of people to worship and to praise and to give honor to the Most High and the Son in that fashion. And I was talking to Nancy earlier today about how even when you gathered, with a friend in speaking on the phone and talking with another about the gospel and about the secrets contained therein, and in sharing information and having dialogue, that is fellowship. Because Christ said that where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am also. And so that is church. It doesn't have to be a building or something along that kind of a line. It could even be a Bible study in your own home, in the comfort of your living room, sharing scripture and hors d'oeuvres, and so church, especially if you think about going back to the early days of the apostles, many of their meetings, in which of course that was church as well, even though there was no such organized way, but that they were gathering together over meals, and after work, during times of whenever they could, they were just meeting together to share the stories that they had of their experience in being in the presence of Christ, and of learning from His example, and of the many stories and the parables that He had referenced to them. They were sharing and trying to come to revelation on all of the different things that He was telling them in story form. And so that is church, and it's similar. So even today, with us gathering together in the way that we are and sharing fellowship over the airwaves, no matter where each of you may be, and even though we are not in the physical presence of one another, this most certainly is church as well. And that this is fellowship in that way. And I know for a lot of you that have awoken to a lot of the strange and esoteric aspects of what we are dealing with as an ecclesia in this last days, that it is often difficult, very difficult even, to find others in which to be able to converse on the higher aspects of what is the profound, deeper revelations of the gospel. And so, we must gather together in ways that we can. My friend Dolores, she started a Sons of God study group on Facebook, and that is also ecclesia. That is also a gathering of seekers of truth. The motto for our website, and I do encourage and ask those of you that can to join us at fallenangels.tv, www.fallenangels.tv. The motto for the website: a seeker of lost paradise may seem a fool to those whom have never sought the other worlds. And this is so very true, that there are, the elect and the righteous and those that even consider the kingdom relevant and important for their life, that make it a priority, are but a very few. and that most are not even seeking out and trying to rediscover or connect to lost paradise. And so most are caught up in the carnal aspects of world and are certainly okay with the things that have been taught to us by the Matrix, and that the American dream of materialism and the gathering of wealth and getting a good education and get a good job so that we can be really being introduced to my work, that have discovered us in the way that they have, that are being led to fellowship with us, and I welcome all of you. But that so much of the world is caught up in the Matrix and not really committed to bearing the cross and to living and adhering to the commandments in the way that Christ exampled to all of us. A lot of people are still trying to succeed in whatever the Matrix would, as far as their job and title and power and prestige and position, and to be placed into things of authority. And those are the kind of things which drive and propel the New World Order. And we were talking about this on the last show that I did this past Wednesday with Professor Truth, and talking about the two different ways of being: the service to self and to service to others, and how Lucifer and the fallen angels and those that he led astray in promising them godhood and kingdoms to own and to rule and own of the for themselves, that they were absolutely not wanting to be servants and not wanting to be under the dominion of the Son, that they wanted to be as God themselves, that they were aspiring to have the praise and the worship and to be honored themselves, much rather than honoring the Son and serving in the Morning Star administration. And so that's why they rebelled. In Ezekiel chapter 28, Isaiah chapter 14, it talks about the aspects of Lucifer prior to his fall, and while he was still in his first estate, and how beautiful and how the Father had blessed him in all aspects, and yet he wanted more and more, and he wanted and then had aspirations to be as the Most High. He wanted to place his throne in the sides of the north, and he wanted all the angels to worship him. And so he promised them godhood and promised them authority and power and prestige, just as he promises those of the line of Cain, the synagogue of Satan, those that serve him, good tax-paying citizens and reap the benefits of being such. That is the focus of life. And for much of the world, that is the direction, and that is the goals and the dreams that have consumed their life. And for many, that's all they will ever seek. That's all they will ever want to succeed at. And they put their entire self, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, into trying to achieve such goal. And most of them will never even hear about nor actually endeavor to seek out anything other. And so the kingdom is something that not a lot of people in the world have any concern for. And this goes along with even a lot of those that are are churchgoers that are part of mainstream churchianity. They will go to church the one day a week, but really their lives are committed more to their jobs and their families, and to succeeding in their jobs, making a lot of money and accumulating a lot of things, and that their spirituality and relationship with God, those things are put on the back burner. They are secondary in priority. And so a lot of people live that way, and even though they try to front and put the mask forward that they are concerned with their eternal salvation, the truth, the real truth of what's in their heart is that they are more apt to be seeking out and involved in sin or entertainment or those delusions which most of the world is enveloped and comfortable with. And so, the church and fellowship is a difficult thing for real truth seekers. And I do consider many of you, a lot of you, and I know that we have a lot of new listeners, and that there are a lot of people just now and that follow his directive, that are propagating and pushing forth the agenda for the New World Order. It's the same kind of thing. And look, they have been excluded from salvation, and they have condemnation and judgment awaiting them. And though this world is temporary under their reign, and that they can, they have deceived and led astray most of the masses. In Revelation 12, it speaks about the serpent, the wise old dragon, which deceiveth the entirety of the whole world. Look at what the Father and the Son have established through the line of the patriarchs, that are his people and his sheep and his lambs and those that follow him. He, when the apostles asked him who amongst them was the greatest, he went to wash their feet and to show through example that service to others and service to your brothers, that this is the way of being, the way of the priest and not the way of the king. Because the seed of the serpent, the line of Cain, they are aspiring to kingship, and they are wanting to be as tyrants, oppressors, and to be ruling with impunity. And yet Christ's example to those of the seed of the woman, to be the priest, to feed the flock, to feed the sheep, to be the good shepherd, to be the good father to the prodigal son. And so those are the two different ways. And those are the things we are still learning about. So I hope that answers your question, Lordens, I believe is your name. But anyways, I want to answer one other thing that Nancy had brought forth earlier today when I was talking to her on the phone. And she had asked me about what I thought about, those that speak in tongues, and what I thought about speaking in tongues. And so the answer that I gave, I want to touch upon a couple passages real quick, and then we'll get into one news item I want to share, and then we're going to go into the context of the show that I have lined up for you this evening, which is focused on the Apocryphon of John, which is the secret revelation of John, part of the Nag Hammadi